A millionaire sees a street kid pushing his daughter's wheelchair in the garden and throws him out on the spot. A few days later, he notices that the girl has stopped smiling and refuses to speak to him. Curious, he watches the security cameras and sees the impossible, the boy teaching his daughter how to walk. With his eyes filled with tears, he realizes that this boy wasn't an intruder. He was what was missing in their lives. Watch until the end to see the outcome. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The pristine garden of the Wellington estate stretched out like a perfectly manicured canvas, its emerald grass trimmed to exactly 1 inch in height, as specified in the extensive maintenance manual. Every morning at precisely 7:15 a.m., 6-year-old Emily Wellington would watch from her wheelchair as the gardeners meticulously followed her father's detailed instructions, ensuring not a single leaf was out of place in their luxurious suburban sanctuary. Emily's small fingers traced patterns on the armrest of her wheelchair, her bright blue eyes following the mechanical precision of the workers. The sound of medical machinery hummed from inside the mansion, a constant reminder of the rigorous schedule that governed her life. In exactly 13 minutes, Nurse Matthews would arrive for her morning checkup, followed by Dr. Richardson at 8:30 for physical therapy, and then tutor Ms. Peterson at 10 sharp. Robert Wellington, Emily's father, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his home office, his reflection ghosting against the glass as he observed his daughter. His perfectly pressed suit and carefully combed hair mirrored the orderly world he had created. Since Sarah's departure 3 years ago, he had transformed their home into a fortress of schedules and procedures, believing that structure and control would somehow fill the void left behind. The morning light caught Emily's golden hair, reminding Robert painfully of Sarah. He quickly turned away, busying himself with the stack of contracts on his mahogany desk. The sound of his fountain pen scratching against paper provided a familiar comfort, a rhythm he could control, unlike the chaos that had torn through their lives. Emily's days followed a carefully orchestrated routine. Physiotherapy sessions, medical consultations, and private lessons filled her schedule, leaving no room for the unpredictable elements of childhood. The army of healthcare professionals and domestic staff moved through their mansion like clockwork, their footsteps echoing against marble floors in perfect time. But while her father saw structure and safety, Emily saw only walls. The other children in the neighborhood played freely on their front lawns, their laughter carrying over the high gates of the Wellington estate. Emily watched them from behind, the ornate iron bars, their games and adventures as distant as the stars she could see from her bedroom window. The mansion's silence was broken only by the clinical beeping of medical monitors and the hushed whispers of staff members. Emily had learned to move through this quiet world like a ghost, her wheelchair gliding soundlessly across polished floors. She had mastered the art of being present yet invisible, understanding early that her father found comfort in predictability. Robert's days were equally regimented, divided between managing his corporate empire and overseeing Emily's care. He attended every medical consultation, reviewed every treatment plan, and personally vetted each staff member. His daughter's well-being had become a project he could manage, with spreadsheets tracking her progress and binders full of medical reports lining his office walls. The relationship between father and daughter had evolved into a series of carefully scheduled interactions. Breakfast at 7:45 a.m., where they sat across from each other at the massive dining table, the silence broken only by the clinking of silverware against fine china. A brief check-in at lunch, where Robert would inquire about her lessons while simultaneously reviewing emails on his phone. Then dinner at 6:30 p.m. sharp, where they would exchange practiced pleasantries before retiring to their respective corners of the mansion. As Emily sat in her garden spot that morning, she noticed a loose bar in the iron fence, barely visible behind a cluster of hydrangeas. It was such a small imperfection in their perfectly maintained world that she almost missed it. But that tiny gap would soon become the doorway to an entirely different life, though neither Emily nor her father could have predicted how a small break in their carefully constructed routine would change everything. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Emily's eyes kept returning to that small gap in the fence, something stirring in her heart that she couldn't quite name. It felt like anticipation, a feeling she had almost forgotten in the methodical march of her days. For the first time in years, she found herself wondering what lay beyond the perfectly trimmed hedges and pristine flower beds of her controlled world. The following Tuesday brought an unexpected disruption to the Wellington estate's carefully maintained order. As Emily sat in her usual morning spot, a flash of movement near the loose fence bar caught her attention. Through the gap appeared a face she had never seen before, a boy about her age with wild, unkempt hair and curious brown eyes that seemed to sparkle with mischief. Unlike the parade of adults who populated Emily's world, this boy didn't immediately focus on her wheelchair. Instead, he grinned at her, displaying a gap where his front tooth should have been. "Hey," he whispered, glancing around as if they were sharing a wonderful secret. "I'm Jake. Want to see something cool?" Emily found herself speechless, caught between the ingrained instruction to avoid strangers and an overwhelming curiosity about this boy who acted as if their meeting was the most natural thing in the world. Before she could respond, Jake squeezed through the gap in the fence, his tattered t-shirt catching briefly on the iron bars. He approached her wheelchair without hesitation, pulling something from the pocket of his worn jeans. "Look what I found," he said, opening his palm to reveal a collection of smooth, colorful stones. "This blue one matches your eyes. It's magic, I can tell." He placed it gently in her hand, and Emily was surprised by its warmth, as if it had absorbed all the summer sunshine. "Magic isn't real," Emily replied automatically, repeating what she had heard countless times from her tutors and doctors. But even as she said it, she found herself clutching the stone tighter, feeling its smooth surface against her palm. Jake shrugged, unperturbed by her skepticism. "That's what grown-ups say because they've forgotten how to look properly. But you can see it, can't you? The way it sparkles differently when you turn it in the light." For the first time in years, Emily felt something bubble up inside her. A laugh, unexpected and genuine. The sound surprised her so much that she quickly covered her mouth, but Jake's smile only grew wider. "See? The magic's already working." He moved behind her wheelchair with natural ease, as if he had done it 1,000 times before. "Want to explore the garden? I bet there are more magical stones hiding somewhere." Without waiting for permission, he began pushing her chair along the winding garden path. Emily knew she should protest. This wasn't part of her schedule. Nurse Matthews would arrive any minute for her morning checkup. But as Jake pointed out shapes in the clouds and made up stories about the garden statues, she found herself caring less and less about the usual routine. They discovered a family of caterpillars on a leaf, which Jake declared were actually tiny dragons in disguise. He showed her how to look at flowers from different angles to see hidden patterns in their petals. Everything familiar suddenly seemed new and exciting through his eyes. Time, which usually moved with such rigid precision in Emily's world, seemed to flow differently in Jake's presence. He told her about the cats he befriended in various neighborhoods, about the best trees for climbing, though he quickly added that he knew some equally good stories about trees that didn't require climbing at all, and about the stars he could see from his favorite sleeping spots. Emily found herself sharing things too, about her favorite books, about the constellations she studied with her astronomy tutor, about the songs she sometimes hummed to herself when she couldn't sleep. Jake listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made her think about familiar things in new ways. As the morning sun climbed higher, Jake glanced at the mansion with a hint of wariness. "I should go," he said, "but can I come back tomorrow? I found this amazing butterfly wing yesterday, and I think it might be from a fairy in disguise." Before Emily could answer, they heard the click of heels on marble, Nurse Matthews arriving for the morning checkup. Jake squeezed Emily's hand once, quick and reassuring, then darted back to the fence with surprising agility. He slipped through the gap just as the garden door opened. "Emily, what are you doing all the way over here?" Nurse Matthews hurried over, checking her watch with a frown. "You're supposed to be by the fountain for your morning vitals." But Emily barely heard her. She was looking at the blue stone in her palm, still warm from the morning sun, and thinking about fairy wings and disguised dragons. For the first time in longer than she could remember, She was looking forward to tomorrow. Over the next few days, Emily's world transformed into something she had never imagined possible. Jake appeared faithfully each morning, slipping through the fence gap with new treasures and stories that made her prescribed routine fade into the background. He brought her a feather that he swore came from an invisible bird, a piece of glass smoothed by the river that he claimed could capture rainbows, and countless stories that painted her structured world in vibrant new colors. The medical staff noticed the change in Emily's demeanor, though they couldn't identify its source. Dr. Richardson remarked that she was more engaged in her physical therapy sessions, while Ms. Peterson noted an improvement in her creative writing assignments. Even Nurse Matthews, despite her continued frustration with Emily's new habit of straying from her designated garden spot, couldn't deny that the child's eyes sparkled with a vitality that had been missing before. Robert Wellington, absorbed in his endless conference calls and business meetings, remained oblivious to these subtle shifts in his daughter's world. His interactions with Emily continued to follow their established pattern, brief exchanges over meals, punctuated by quick glances at his ever-present phone and tablet. One particularly sunny morning, Jake arrived with an old radio he'd found. "It only plays static," he admitted, turning the knobs carefully. "But if you listen really closely, you can hear mermaids singing." Emily giggled at the idea, but found herself leaning forward in her wheelchair, straining to hear mythical melodies in the white noise. "Tell me about your mum," Jake said suddenly, his fingers still fiddling with the radio dials. The question caught Emily off guard. No one in the mansion ever mentioned her mother. It was as if Sarah Wellington had been carefully edited out of their lives, like a mistake in one of her father's contracts. "She used to sing to me," Emily found herself saying, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Not lullabies like other moms. She made up silly songs about everything. About the clouds, about my stuffed animals, about the way the garden looks in the rain." She paused, touching the blue stone Jake had given her on their first meeting, which she now kept in her pocket. Dad packed away all her pictures after she left. Jake listened with the same quiet attention he gave to everything Emily said, his presence offering comfort without pity. "My mum left too," he shared, his voice matter-of-fact. "She said she was going to the store to buy ice cream, but she must have gotten lost because she never came back." The simplicity of his words made Emily's heart ache. She reached out and took his hand, surprising herself with the gesture. Physical contact wasn't part of her normal routine. Except for medical examinations and therapy sessions, nobody touched her with such casual warmth. "Maybe they're on an adventure together," Jake suggested, squeezing her hand gently. "Finding magical stones and invisible birds to send back to us." The idea was so perfectly Jake, turning something painful into something wonderful, that Emily couldn't help but smile. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Richardson for Emily's physical therapy session. Jake disappeared, through his gap in the fence, but not before promising to return the next day with what he called a super special surprise. That evening, during their usual silent dinner, Emily found herself studying her father's face. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper than she remembered, and his shoulders carried a tension that never quite eased. She wondered if he ever thought about her mother's songs, if he ever missed the chaos and unpredictability that Jake was slowly teaching her to embrace. "Dad," she said, breaking their customary silence, "do you believe in magic?" Robert Wellington's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his expression flickering between surprise and confusion. It was the first time in years that Emily had initiated a conversation during their meals. "Magic isn't real, sweetheart," he replied automatically, his tone gentle but firm. "It's just tricks and illusions that can be explained by science and logic." Emily thought about Jake's colorful stones, about invisible birds and mermaid songs in static. She thought about how her wheelchair felt different when he pushed it, less like a medical device and more like a chariot for adventures. "Maybe," she said quietly, "there are some things that logic can't explain." Her father's brow furrowed slightly, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed with another urgent business matter. The moment passed, and their dinner returned to its usual silence. But something had shifted ever so slightly, in the carefully ordered atmosphere of the Wellington mansion. That night, lying in her bed surrounded by medical monitors, Emily held Jake's blue stone up to the moonlight streaming through her window. She watched how it caught and transformed the light, creating tiny dancing patterns on her ceiling. For the first time, she understood what Jake meant about grown-ups forgetting how to look properly. Sometimes, the most magical things were hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to see them with the right kind of eyes. The next morning dawned with an unusual energy in the air. Emily woke before her alarm, her anticipation of Jake's promised super special surprise making it impossible to sleep. She convinced Nurse Matthews to take her to the garden 15 minutes earlier than usual, earning a concerned look, but no resistance from the surprised nurse. Jake was already waiting by the fence, practically bouncing with excitement. In his hands, he clutched something wrapped in what appeared to be pages from an old magazine. "Close your eyes," he instructed as he squeezed through the gap, his voice trembling with barely contained enthusiasm. Emily obliged, listening to his footsteps. Approaching her wheelchair, she felt something being placed in her lap, something surprisingly heavy and warm. "Okay, open them." When she opened her eyes, Emily found herself staring at a small mechanical device clearly assembled from various discarded parts. It had wheels made from old toy cars, a body constructed from pieces of plastic and metal, and what looked like a tiny motor at its center. "I made it," Jake announced proudly. "See, when you turn this knob here, it moves forward, and this one makes it turn. I thought maybe we could race together in the garden. You with your chair, and me running beside you with this." His voice grew softer, suddenly uncertain. "Only if you want to, of course." Emily touched the contraption gently, noting how each piece had been carefully fitted together. No one had ever made anything for her before. Her world was filled with expensive medical equipment and professional care, but nothing with this kind of personal touch. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jake's face lit up with relief and joy, and he immediately launched into an excited explanation of how he had found each part and figured out how to make them work together. They spent the morning racing along the garden paths, Jake running alongside Emily's wheelchair while controlling his mechanical creation. Their laughter echoed across the normally quiet garden, startling a pair of birds from their perch in the ornamental cherry tree. During one of their races, Emily felt something she had never experienced before, a desire to move on her own, to push her wheelchair faster, to feel the wind in her hair. Jake noticed her struggling with the wheels, and instead of taking over like the adults always did, he showed her different ways to grip the rings, how to use momentum to her advantage. "You're stronger than you think," he told her matter-of-factly, as she managed to complete a full circuit of the garden path by herself for the first time. "The magic stones are helping, but the real power was inside you all along." He said it without a hint of condescension, as if he was simply stating an obvious truth. As the morning wore on, they took a break under the shade of the cherry tree. Jake had brought some slightly squashed cookies that he shared with Emily. Nothing like the precise, nutritionist-approved snacks she usually received, but somehow tasting better than anything she'd ever eaten. "Why did you make this for me?" Emily asked, watching the little mechanical racer spin in circles on the grass beside them. Jake shrugged, brushing cookie crumbs from his shirt. "Because you're my friend," he said simply. "And friends make each other smile. That's what my mom used to say before." He trailed off, his usual cheerfulness dimming slightly. Emily reached out and took his hand, just as she had done the day before. "We can be each other's family," she suggested softly, "the kind that chooses each other like in the stories you tell." Jake's smile returned, brighter than ever. "Yeah," he agreed, squeezing her hand. "A family that believes in magic and races in gardens and finds treasure in ordinary things." The sound of approaching footsteps made them both look up. Through the garden doors, they could see Robert Wellington walking toward them, his attention focused on his phone as usual. Jake quickly gathered his mechanical racer, preparing to make his usual swift exit through the fence. But before he left, he pressed something into Emily's hand, another stone, this one a warm amber color that seemed to glow in the sunlight. "For courage," he whispered. "Sometimes that's the most powerful magic of all." As Jake disappeared through the fence and her father approached, Emily clutched the amber stone tightly. For the first time, she found herself wondering if perhaps it was time to share her magical world with her father, to help him remember how to see things properly again, the way Jake had taught her. Robert Wellington sat in his home office, surrounded by the usual stack of contracts and financial reports, but for once, his attention wasn't on the documents before him. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the security camera feed displayed on one of his monitors, showing the garden where he had seen Emily earlier that day. Something had changed in his daughter over the past few weeks. He had noticed it in small ways: her improved appetite at dinner, the way she hummed softly to herself during their brief encounters, the spark in her eyes that reminded him painfully of Sarah. At first, he had attributed these changes to the new treatment protocol Dr. Richardson had implemented, but now he wasn't so sure. Rewinding the security footage, he watched as Emily wheeled herself around the garden with newfound confidence. His fingers froze over the keyboard when he saw a small figure squeeze through a gap in the fence, a boy in worn clothes with unruly hair. Robert's first instinct was to call security, but something made him pause. The boy approached Emily, without hesitation, pulling something from his pocket that glinted in the morning sun. Robert leaned closer to the screen, his heart racing, but what he saw next made him sink back in his chair. The boy was showing Emily a collection of ordinary stones, gesturing animatedly as he told what appeared to be a story. As Robert continued, watching the footage, his perfectly ordered world began to shift. He saw his daughter laugh, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle she used during their formal interactions. He watched as the boy pushed her wheelchair around the garden, not with the clinical efficiency of the medical staff, but with the natural ease of a friend. Hours of footage revealed a pattern he had somehow missed. Every morning, the boy would appear with new treasures, mechanical toys, interesting rocks, fallen feathers. But more than these simple gifts, he brought something Robert hadn't seen in his daughter since Sarah left: joy. The security cameras captured moments that made Robert's chest tighten. The boy teaching Emily different ways to maneuver her wheelchair, encouraging her when she struggled. Emily sharing her knowledge of constellations, drawing patterns in the air while the boy listened with genuine interest. Simple conversations that seemed to light up his daughter's entire being. One particular scene caught his attention. The boy was sitting cross-legged beside Emily's wheelchair, holding what looked like an old radio. Both children had their eyes closed, heads tilted together, apparently listening for something in the static. The intimacy of the moment, the pure innocence of their friendship, made Robert realize how sterile his daughter's world had become. He had built their life around routines and schedules, thinking structure would protect Emily from further hurt. But watching these recordings, he saw how this boy had managed to do what an army of medical professionals couldn't. He had given Emily a reason to push herself, to engage with the world around her. Robert's eyes moved to the family portrait on his desk, taken before Sarah's departure. In it, Emily sat between her parents, her smile bright and unrehearsed. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen that smile, until now, in these security footage frames, shared with a boy who had nothing but clearly gave Emily everything she needed. Opening his laptop, Robert began to research local missing children reports, homeless shelters, and social services. The boy's appearance suggested he might be living on the streets, and the thought of him searching through dumpsters for food, while bringing such happiness to Emily, was almost unbearable. A notification popped up on his screen, another business meeting starting in 5 minutes. For the first time in years, Robert Wellington clicked decline. Instead, he pulled up the real-time security feed of the garden. Emily was there, in her usual spot, holding one of the boy's stones up to the sunlight, watching it sparkle. Robert stood up from his desk, straightening his tie out of habit. He had spent years building walls to protect his daughter, never realizing that what she really needed was a window, or in this case, a gap in the fence. It was time to make some changes, starting with finding this mysterious boy, who had somehow managed to bring magic back into their carefully ordered world. The next morning brought a deviation from the Wellington estate's precise schedule. Rather than heading straight to his office after breakfast, Robert lingered in the garden, watching Emily from a distance. She sat in her usual spot, but her posture was different, alert, expectant, holding what appeared to be half of a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. Right on schedule, the boy appeared through the gap in the fence. Robert tensed, his protective instincts warring with his newfound understanding. The boy froze when he saw Robert, his whole body poised for flight, but before either of them could react, Emily's voice rang out across the garden. "Jake! Dad, this is—" "Jake, he's my friend." The simple declaration held such certainty, such trust that Robert found himself responding to it almost instinctively. He took a step forward, noting how the boy, Jake, positioned himself slightly in front of Emily's wheelchair, as if ready to protect her despite his obvious fear. "I've seen your mechanical racer," Robert said quietly, remembering the footage from yesterday. "It's quite impressive engineering for someone your age." Jake's eyes widened in surprise, darting between Robert and Emily. "You're not angry?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Robert moved closer, carefully maintaining a non-threatening posture. "No, I'm not angry, but I am concerned about where you've been sleeping and whether you're getting enough to eat." The question seemed to catch Jake off guard. He glanced at Emily, who reached out and took his hand, offering silent support. I find places," he mumbled. "There's a nice spot behind the library where they don't chase me away, and sometimes the baker gives me day-old bread if I help sweep the sidewalk." Emily's grip on Jake's hand tightened. "Dad," she said, her voice stronger than Robert had heard. "In years, Jake makes everything better. He shows me how to be brave, and he believes in magic, and he never looks at me like I'm broken." The last words hit Robert like a physical blow. Had that been his mistake all these years? Had his focus on Emily's medical care made her feel like something that needed fixing rather than a child who needed love? "Would you like to come inside, Jake?" Robert asked, surprising himself almost as much as the children. "Our chef makes excellent pancakes, and I think we need to have a conversation." Jake hesitated, looking uncertainly at Emily. She beamed at him, and Robert saw in that smile a shadow of Sarah, the same unfettered joy, the same ability to find light in dark places. "It's okay," she assured Jake. "Dad's different when he really looks at things, like you taught me." Inside the kitchen, Robert watched as Jake carefully cut his pancakes into precise squares, eating each piece as if it might be his last. Emily chatted excitedly about their garden adventures, while Jake added quiet details about the treasures he'd found and the stories behind each one. "I wrote you letters," Jake suddenly blurted out, looking at Robert. "I put them in your mailbox, but maybe they got lost with all the business papers. I wanted to explain that I just wanted to make Emily smile. She has the best smile, but it was hiding before." Robert thought about the stack of mail he had his assistant sort each day, wondering how many of Jake's letters had been discarded as unimportant. How many other precious things had he missed in his pursuit of perfect order? "Jake," Robert said carefully, "I have a proposition for you. Would you be interested in staying here for a while? We have plenty of room, and it would make me feel better knowing you're safe and well-fed." The fork clattered from Jake's hand onto the plate. "You mean like living here with Emily?" His voice trembled with a mix of hope and disbelief. "Yes," Robert replied, watching as Emily's face lit up with joy. "We'd need to contact the proper authorities, of course, but I have some experience with legal matters. We could start with temporary guardianship while we sort everything out." Jake's eyes filled with tears, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Could I still tell Emily stories and show her the magical things I find?" Robert looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw how she had blossomed under Jake's influence. "I think we could all use a little more magic in our lives," he said softly, and for the first time in years, he felt the rigid walls of his carefully constructed world begin to crumble, not in destruction, but in transformation. The following weeks brought unprecedented changes to the Wellington estate. The rigid schedule that had once governed every minute began to flex and bend, making room for something new to grow. Jake's presence acted as a catalyst, transforming the mansion's sterile atmosphere into something warmer and more vibrant. Robert found himself navigating unfamiliar territory, shopping for children's clothes with Jake, who seemed overwhelmed by the simple act of choosing his own outfits. The boy approached each selection with careful consideration, as if he couldn't quite believe these choices were really his to make. "Are you sure it's okay?" Jake would ask repeatedly, holding up simple t-shirts or examining sneakers with wonder. "They're brand new, not even a little worn out." "Of course it's okay," Robert would respond, his heart aching at the boy's hesitation. He had already learned that Jake's gratitude for basic necessities spoke volumes about his past experiences. The mansion's staff adapted to the changes with varying degrees of adjustment. Nurse Matthews initially expressed concern about the disruption to Emily's medical routine, but even she couldn't deny the positive changes in her young patient. Emily was more engaged in her therapy sessions, more willing to push herself, especially when Jake was there to cheer her on. One morning during Emily's physical therapy session, something extraordinary happened. Jake was sitting cross-legged on the floor, working on another mechanical creation, while occasionally calling out encouragement. Dr. Richardson was helping Emily with her standing exercises when Jake looked up and said casually, "You've got this." Him just like the magical stones, one small step at a time. Whether it was Jake's words, the weeks of increased determination, or perhaps something truly magical, Emily managed to take 2 small steps on her own before her strength gave out. The room erupted in excitement, Dr. Richardson quickly making notes, Nurse Matthews dabbing at her eyes, and Jake beaming with pride. Robert, who had been watching from the doorway, felt his throat tighten. He watched as Jake rushed to Emily's side, not to help her back to the wheelchair as the adults did, but to high-five her and start planning their next garden adventure. "Did you see that, Dad?" Emily called out, her face flushed with accomplishment. "Jake said I could do it, and he was right." Later that evening, Robert sat in his office looking over the temporary guardianship papers his legal team had prepared. The process was moving forward, but there were complications. Jake's lack of documentation posed challenges, and the search for his mother had so far yielded no results. A knock at his office door pulled him from his thoughts. Jake stood there, looking small but determined in his new blue pajamas. "Mr. Wellington, can I talk to you?" "Of course, Jake, come in." Robert gestured to the chair across from his desk, but Jake remained standing, fidgeting with something in his pocket. "I found this today," Jake said, placing a smooth grey stone on Robert's desk. "It's not colorful like Emily's stones, but it reminded me of your suits. I thought maybe you needed some magic too." Robert picked up the stone, feeling its weight in his palm. It was ordinary in every way, yet handling it felt significant, like accepting an offering of peace or trust, or perhaps both. "Emily told me about her mom," Jake continued, his voice quiet but steady. "About how she used to sing and make everything fun. My mom, she used to say that sometimes people leave because they're broken inside, not because of us. Maybe that's what happened with both our moms?" Robert looked at the boy standing before him, struck by the wisdom in his words. "You're very perceptive, Jake, and very kind to share your stone with me." "You can keep it," Jake said earnestly. "Everyone needs a little magic, even grown-ups who've forgotten how to see it." He paused, then added softly, "Thank you for letting me stay here. I promise I'll be good, and I'll help Emily get stronger, and I won't take up too much space." Robert stood up and walked around his desk, kneeling to meet Jake's eyes. "Jake, you don't have to earn your place here. You're not taking up space. You're filling a space that we didn't even realize was empty." Jake's eyes welled with tears, and for the first time, he initiated physical contact, throwing his arms around Robert's neck. Robert held him close, feeling the boy's small frame shake with silent sobs. In that moment, holding Jake while clutching the ordinary grey stone that somehow felt extraordinary, Robert understood that his carefully ordered world hadn't just been disrupted, it had been completed. The arrival of autumn brought crisp mornings and falling leaves to the Wellington Estates garden. Jake and Emily had developed a new routine of collecting the most colourful leaves, which they pressed between pages of old books. Each leaf, according to Jake, held its own special kind of magic, preserved forever between the pages. Robert watched their leaf-collecting expedition from his office window, a stack of important documents temporarily forgotten on his desk. The security cameras still ran, but he rarely checked them now. He preferred to witness the children's adventures firsthand when he could. His contemplation was interrupted by a call from his legal team. "Mr. Wellington, we've located someone claiming to be Jake's uncle. He's provided documentation to support his claim." The news hit Robert like a physical blow. He watched through the window as Jake helped Emily reach for a particularly vibrant maple leaf, their laughter carrying across the garden. The thought of disrupting this newfound happiness made his chest tight. "His uncle?" Robert managed to ask, his voice carefully controlled. "Where has he been all this time?" "He's been searching for Jake for months, sir. Apparently he wasn't aware of his sister's departure until recently. He works as a delivery driver, has 2 older children of his own. The documentation appears legitimate." Robert thanked his team and ended the call, his mind racing. Through the window he could see Jake demonstrating his latest invention to Emily, a small wind-powered device that made fallen leaves dance in circles. The boy's creativity seemed to know no bounds, especially now that he had access to proper tools and materials. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Robert sat in his study examining Jake's file. The uncle's claim seemed genuine. There were old family photos, school records from before Jake's mother left, even a few birthday cards signed Uncle Pete. The man had a modest but stable income, a small house in a working-class neighborhood, and a clean record. Lost in thought, Robert almost missed the soft knock at his door. He looked up to find Emily in her wheelchair, wearing her star-patterned pajamas. "Dad? Is everything okay? You were quiet at dinner." Robert wheeled her into the study, closing the door softly behind them. "How would you feel about having Jake stay with us permanently?" he asked carefully. "As a real part of our family." Emily's face lit up. "Oh, you mean like a brother? For real?" Her excitement faded slightly as she studied her father's expression. "But something's wrong, isn't it?" "Jake's uncle has found him," Robert explained gently. "He has a legal right to claim guardianship." Emily's hands gripped her wheelchair's armrests tightly. "But Jake belongs here. He makes everything better. He helps me be brave, and he makes you smile more, and he knows exactly where to find the best magical stones." Her voice trembled. "Please, Dad, you can't let them take him away." Robert reached for his daughter's hand, remembering how rarely they had touched before Jake came into their lives. "I promise you, Emily, I will do everything I can to keep our family together." "Pinky promise?" Emily held out her little finger, something she must have learned from Jake. "Pinky promise," Robert agreed, linking his finger with hers. "We'll need to tell Jake tomorrow, though. He has a right to know." Emily nodded solemnly. "Can I be there when you tell him? He might need to hold on to his courage stone." "Of course, sweetheart." Robert marveled at his daughter's emotional intelligence, another positive change he could attribute to Jake's influence. As he wheeled Emily back to her room, they passed Jake's door. Soft light spilled from underneath. He was probably working on another invention by flashlight. Robert made a mental note to remind him about bedtime, then smiled at himself. A year ago, such a deviation from schedule would have warranted a stern conversation. Now it just seemed like another piece of the wonderful chaos Jake had brought into their lives. Tucking Emily into bed, Robert noticed the collection of stones on her nightstand, each one carefully arranged and, according to Jake's system, charged with different types of magic for different needs. The sight strengthened his resolve. Some things were worth fighting for, and this unlikely family they had formed was definitely one of them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Wellington estate's garden as Robert prepared to share the news with Jake. Emily insisted on having their talk in their special spot under the cherry tree, where Jake had first shared his magical stones. She believed it would make things easier, though Robert wasn't sure anything could make this conversation simple. Jake was tinkering with his latest invention, a small mechanical butterfly that could flap its wings when wound up, when Robert and Emily approached. He looked up with his usual bright smile, which faltered slightly when he saw their serious expressions. "Is everything okay?" Jake asked, setting down his creation carefully. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, absolutely not," Robert assured him quickly, settling onto the grass beside the children. "You haven't done anything wrong, but there's something important we need to discuss." Emily reached over and took Jake's hand, just as she had done so many times before. Jake squeezed back automatically, but his eyes remained fixed on Robert's face. "Jake, we've found your uncle," Robert said gently. "His name is Pete, and he's been looking for you for a long time." The color drained from Jake's face. His free hand instinctively went to his pocket, where Robert knew he kept his own collection of magical stones. "Oh," he said in a small voice. Does that mean I have to leave?" "Nobody's making any decisions right now," Robert assured him, though his heart ached at the fear in Jake's eyes. "Your uncle has a legal right to request guardianship, but he's agreed to meet with us first to talk about what's best for you." "But we're Jake's family now," Emily interjected, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. "We take care of each other. That's what families do, right, Dad?" Robert nodded, remembering Jake's words about chosen families from weeks ago. "That's right, sweetheart, and we're going to fight to keep our family together." Jake sat very still, processing this information. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What's he like, my uncle?" "He seems like a kind man," Robert answered honestly. "He has 2 older children and he's been searching for you since he learned about your mother's departure. He wants to meet you, but only when you're ready." Jake's fingers tightened around Emily's hand. Can I think about it? I mean, about meeting him?" "Of course you can," Robert assured him. "This is your decision, Jake. We'll support whatever you choose." Emily tugged gently on Jake's hand until he looked at her. "Remember what you told me about the magic stones? How they help us be brave when we're scared? Maybe we need all of them for this." A ghost of a smile crossed Jake's face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 stones, 1 blue, 1 amber, and 1 gray. "The whole collection," he said softly. "One for each of us." Robert recognized the gray stone Jake had given him weeks ago, which he now kept on his desk. Emily's blue stone caught the morning light, sparkling just as it had on the day Jake first gave it to her. The amber stone in Jake's own hand seemed to glow with an inner warmth. "Whatever happens," Jake said, his voice growing stronger, "the magic is real, right? Even if grown-ups don't always see it?" "The magic is definitely real," Robert found himself saying, surprising both children and himself. "Sometimes it just takes a special person to help us remember how to see it." Jake nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. He picked up his mechanical butterfly, winding it carefully. I think I'd like to meet him, but can you and Emily be there too, just in case I need extra magic?" "We'll be right beside you," Robert promised, watching as Jake released the butterfly, its delicate wings catching the sunlight as it fluttered between them. Emily leaned her head against Jake's shoulder. "And after, can we still hunt for magical stones in the garden, uncle or no uncle?" "Always," Jake replied, a real smile finally returning to his face. "There's still so much magic we haven't found yet." Robert watched his children, because that's what they both were now, regardless of blood or law, supporting each other through this challenge. The garden around them seemed to glow with a special kind of light, and for a moment, he could almost believe he saw what Jake saw, the magic hiding in ordinary things, waiting to be discovered by those who knew how to look. The day of Uncle Say. Pete's visit arrived with an unusual tension in the Wellington estate. The normally pristine garden had been left deliberately untouched that morning. Allowing the autumn leaves to create a magical carpet of red and gold, Jake insisted it would help everyone see the magic better. Emily wore her favorite star-patterned dress, while Jake had chosen the blue button-down shirt he usually saved for special occasions. They sat together in the garden, Jake perched on the arm of Emily's wheelchair, both clutching their respective magical stones. Uncle Pete arrived, exactly at noon, looking nothing like what any of them had expected. He was a tall man with kind eyes and work-worn hands, wearing a casual jacket and carrying a small wrapped package. Robert met him at the garden gate, noting how the man's eyes immediately found Jake, softening with emotion. "Hello, Jake. Uncle, Pete said gently, staying where he was until Jake gave some sign that it was okay to come closer. You've grown so much since I last saw you. Jake shifted slightly closer to Emily, his hand tightening around his amber stone. You remember me? He asked hesitantly. Of course I do. You used to help me wash my delivery truck every Sunday, and you always insisted on drawing pictures in the soap before we rinsed it off. Uncle Pete smiled warmly at the memory. You were quite the artist. Something flickered across Jake's face, a distant memory perhaps, or the echo of a happier time. I remember the truck, he said slowly. It was red and you let me sit in the driver's seat sometimes. Uncle Pete nodded, taking a careful step forward. That's right. And you always asked if we could install wings on it, so it could fly over. Traffic? Jake's tension eased slightly at this confirmation of a shared past. Emily, sensing his uncertainty, spoke up. Jake invents things now. He made a butterfly that can really fly. Uncle Pete's eyes moved to Emily, taking in her wheelchair and the protective way Jake stayed close to her. I'd love to see that, he said sincerely. Your dad tells me you've become quite the engineer, Jake. Jake hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the mechanical butterfly. With trembling fingers, he wound it up and released it into the air. The delicate creation caught the sunlight as it fluttered between them, its wings casting shifting shadows on the fallen leaves. That's incredible, Uncle Pete breathed, watching the butterfly's flight with genuine amazement. You always were clever with your hands, but this is something special. Robert watched as Jake's posture straightened slightly at the praise. Emily helps me test everything, he said, his voice stronger. She's really good at finding ways to make things work better. We're a team, Emily added firmly, reaching for Jake's hand. We find magic together. Uncle Pete glanced at Robert, something unspoken passing between the adults. Then he held out the package he'd brought. Speaking of magic, I've kept something for you all these years, Jake. I think maybe it's time you had it back. Jake accepted the package cautiously. When he unwrapped it, his eyes widened in recognition. It was a small, worn notebook filled with childish drawings, sketches of flying trucks, magical machines, and impossible inventions. You kept it, Jake whispered, running his fingers over the faded pages. Of course I did. I always hoped I'd find you again. Uncle Pete's voice was thick with emotion. Jake, I want you to know that I looked for you and your mom when you disappeared. I never stopped looking. Jake studied the old drawings, then looked around at the garden where his new inventions lay scattered among the fallen leaves. Finally, his eyes settled on Emily and Robert. I have a family now, he said quietly but firmly. They help me make my inventions real, not just drawings anymore. Uncle Pete nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. I can see that, and I'm not here to take you away from them, Jake. I just want to be part of your life again if you'll let me, maybe. Maybe there's room for more family. The mechanical butterfly chose that moment to land on Emily's wheelchair, its wings still catching the sunlight. Jake watched it for a long moment, then looked up at his uncle with new confidence. Emily says real magic grows when you share it, he said thoughtfully. Maybe we could start with Sundays, like we used to, and you could meet all my inventions, and I could meet my cousins, and... He glanced at Robert and Emily, drawing strength from their encouraging smiles, and we could all be family together. Uncle Pete's face broke into a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I'd like that very much, Jake, and maybe sometimes you could help me wash the truck again. It's still red and it still needs wings. For the first time that day, Jake laughed, a genuine joyful sound that seemed to make the garden's colors brighter. I'm better at building wings now, he said, reaching for his toolkit. Want to see how? The weeks following Uncle Pete's first visit brought new rhythms to the Wellington estate. Sundays became special days, filled with the sound of laughter, the smell of soap suds, and the sight of a red delivery truck parked proudly in the driveway. Jake's cousins, Tommy and Michael, quickly became regular visitors, bringing their own brand of energy to the previously quiet mansion. Emily discovered she had a talent for organizing what Jake and his cousins called invention competitions. From her wheelchair, she would announce challenges like Create something that can catch falling leaves or design a machine that can sort magical stones by color. The boys would spend hours crafting their entries, while Emily served as the official judge, taking her role very seriously. One particularly memorable Sunday, Robert found himself in an unusual position, sitting on the ground in his expensive suit, helping Tommy hold a piece of cardboard steady, while Jake attached some gears he'd salvaged from old toys. Emily was nearby, deep in conversation with Michael about the aerodynamics of paper airplanes. "You've created something remarkable here," Uncle Pete said quietly, settling down beside Robert. "I was worried about Jake when I first found him, but now I see he's exactly where he needs to be." Robert watched as Jake demonstrated his latest invention to his cousins, a small device that could launch paper airplanes in perfect spirals. "He's changed our lives more than we've changed his," he admitted. "Before Jake, I thought I was protecting Emily by controlling everything. Now I realize I was just holding her back." As if to prove his point, Emily wheeled herself over to the boys, offering suggestions for improving the paper airplane launcher. Her movements were stronger now, more confident. Dr. Richardson had noted significant improvements in her physical therapy sessions, attributing much of it to her increased motivation and emotional well-being. "Jake has that effect on people," Uncle Pete nodded, smiling as his nephew excitedly explained something to Emily, his hands moving animatedly. "He sees the world differently, always has. My sister, she couldn't handle it. She wanted everything to be normal, predictable, but Jake was always finding magic in broken things, seeing possibilities where others saw junk." Robert thought about the collection of magical stones that now decorated various spots around the mansion. On his desk, on Emily's nightstand, even on the kitchen windowsill where Mrs. Chen, their cook, had started placing them for good luck. "I used to be like that too," he confessed, focused on making everything perfect, controlled. "It took Jake to show me that sometimes the most perfect things are the ones that don't fit into our careful plans." The children's laughter drew their attention back to the scene before them. Jake had modified his invention to shoot multiple planes at once, creating a spectacular display of spiraling paper against the autumn sky. Emily was clapping in delight, while Tommy and Michael were already gathering the landed planes for another launch. "Did you know," Uncle Pete said softly, "that Jake's been teaching Emily some basic engineering principles? I overheard them yesterday. He was explaining leverage and force using those stones of his as examples. She understood it better than when her science tutor tried to teach her the same concepts." Robert hadn't known this, but it didn't surprise him. He'd noticed Emily's school reports showing improvement across all subjects, particularly in sciences. Her tutors attributed it to increased engagement and curiosity, traits that had blossomed since Jake's arrival. "We're having a hearing next week," Robert mentioned, keeping his voice low so the children wouldn't hear. "For the permanent guardianship arrangement." Uncle Pete nodded, his eyes still on the children. "I've already submitted my statement supporting your petition. Jake needs stability, love, and space to be himself. He has all that here." He paused, watching as Jake helped Emily position a paper airplane just right in the launcher. "Plus, I get to be the fun uncle who shows up with ice cream and new parts for inventions. It's a win-win." Robert felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd been worried about the hearing, concerned that Jake's blood relative might have second thoughts about the arrangement. "You'll still come every Sunday?" "Try and stop me," Uncle Pete chuckled. "Besides, somebody needs to teach these kids how to properly wash a truck. Your gardener's starting to give me dirty looks about all the soap suds on his precious flowers." Their conversation was interrupted by excited shouts from the children. Jake had managed to create a formation of paper airplanes that flew in a perfect circle before landing. Emily was declaring it the winning